Joining me on 12 Minutes this week at the Brussels Economic Security Forum is US Ambassador to the EU, Andrew Pudzer. Ambassador, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us on Euronews.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Earlier this week, the European Commission unveiled what it calls a tech sovereignty package. And the idea is to remove dependencies on tech companies in China and the United States in an effort to basically shore up European security. What's your reaction to that? Because the Europeans say this is necessary.
Well, it's a very thick bill, and I have not had a chance to look through it very thoroughly yet. But I hope that this tech sovereignty doesn't drive a wedge between the United States and Europe in the tech area, because I think that it's very important that they stay united, that we partner with Europe. We've now got hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have a trade agreement. We've got Pax Silica, which is an effort to involve our allies, including the European Union, in the chip industry and our supply chains and in artificial intelligence generally. We've got a critical minerals memorandum of understanding, so we can try and maybe ring fence some economies so that we're not subject to economic coercion when it comes to these rare earth minerals. Europe is behind in the AI race. They're way behind China, and China is behind the United States. They're not going to catch up. So I think the more they separate from the US AI hardware stack, which is important if you're going to be in the AI economy, the more they separate themselves from that, the more negative it's going to be. So I'm hoping it'll be more of a partnership and less of a competition.
But the EU would say, well, we're too reliant on the United States for financial services as well as digital services. And one example that has come up over the past few months is the US sanctions on judges at the International Criminal Court, where those judges who live in The Hague in a European country can no longer use their Microsoft accounts and can no longer use US credit cards or credit cards that everybody else has. So they feel, well, that's not right, but also they shouldn't be relying on the US for supplying these services.
Yeah, we definitely have disagreements with with these particular judges and the way that they've dealt with international law and American companies, American individuals, as well as other people around the globe. But this is a small part of what's involved in a massive relationship, a cross-continental relationship that's very, very intertwined. You really can't break it up. You can't remove it. Europe is far enough behind the United States and China that it really can't catch up. So I don't know that separating off is going to solve the problems they're trying to solve.
But the point I suppose they're making is that they need to be independent to protect themselves from a sovereign perspective. But also there are concerns because of the last year or so with the Trump administration. The Europeans feel slightly under threat or slightly coerced. If you look at maybe the trade deal that was agreed in Turnberry just at the end of last summer, that there was a 15% tariff rate imposed on the Europeans. It wasn't much of a negotiation. You have also the Greenland issue. So the Europeans feel now is the time not to decouple, but to at least de-risk from the United States as well as China.
So with the trade agreement was is an effort that President von der Leyen and President Trump mutually negotiated to try and rebalance a very unbalanced trade relationship. Our largest trade deficit in the world is with the European Union. Now, it is the largest trade relationship in the world, but for years, you would pay 10% tariff to sell a Cadillac in Berlin, but you'd only pay a 2.5% tariff to sell a Mercedes-Benz in Detroit. And nobody in Europe seemed to be complaining about the imbalance at that point in time. It's only now that we're trying to rebalance the relationship that inequity created that people are complaining. The 50% tariff you mentioned is on steel and aluminum, and I will also point out that Europe has a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum. The idea of those tariffs is both to keep out subsidized product from China, where they're selling steel and aluminum at prices that really nobody in the world can compete with because they're subsidized by the Chinese government. So Europe is doing the same thing on steel and aluminum that the United States is. On Greenland, what the president said was he wouldn't take any options off the table. Greenland is a very strategically important issue for the United States. It's important for Europe. I don't think really a year ago, if we had this discussion, people would be as aware of how strategically important Greenland is. So it's important for the United States, it's important for Europe, and it's important that people understand that this is an area of the country, area of the world where China and Russia will try and take advantage.
Yeah.
And I think they're a little more nervous about how the United States would react than they are about how Denmark would react.
So can you say then that Denmark has nothing to worry about? Because we did also see the Prime Minister of Greenland saying that the US envoy to Nuuk pretty much had the same intentions as Donald Trump said he did back in January. Marco Rubio said Greenland's part of Denmark for now. So it seems to be a little bit more about than highlighting the security threat from Russia and China in the high north and the Arctic.
Well, but it did highlight the security threat. I think that's the important point here. Whether or not the United States becomes more involved and the extent to which we become more involved will, in fact, be decided by the President and Secretary Rubio, not by me. But I think it's important we understand that it's important that the United States be involved and remain involved in Greenland. And I think Europe has now realized that it needs to step up its defense and its position with respect to Greenland. So I think we're headed in the right direction. Where it ends up, that'll be, as I said, up to the President and the Secretary of State.
We've seen President Zelensky of Ukraine taking, I suppose, the mantle into his own hands about trying to end the Russian invasion of his country, where he wrote a letter personally for President Putin saying that he would like to meet him. Do you think this is a good idea, that the Ukrainians are going to try to take control of the situation and the Europeans maybe? Because obviously the US is very busy dealing with the Strait of Hormuz.
So the extent to which the President or Secretary Rubio are involved in the peace negotiations with Ukraine is obviously something that's in the discretion of the President. I think he's been very open that he wants to see this war end. I think it's been a great frustration to him that he hasn't been able to bring about an end to the war. I have not talked to him about it, but I'd be very surprised if he objected to Putin and Zelensky talking, particularly if it ended up with a resolution of this conflict. I think the Ukrainian people have lasted here much longer than anybody thought they were going to last. I think a lot of people thought they maybe wouldn't make it a couple of weeks, and I think we're in year 5. So they've been incredibly resilient, and I hope they bring about an end to the war. I think it's important to everybody.
One of the concerns that Europe has is that the Americans are moving away from the security architecture of the European continent, which of course the Europeans are saying this is about time, we need to step up, we need to start paying 5% and so on. But there's a real fear that that also means in times of war that maybe our allies won't be there for them. When you look at the sort of NATO force model and the reduction of the capabilities that are existing there. Do you think America is turning away from the Europe?
Well, I think America is refocusing some of its energies and resources on dealing with Asia, which is we have a competitor in China that really requires that we refocus how we allocate our resources. And there's certainly nothing wrong with asking Europe to step up and take care of itself. But look, America came to the defense of Europe twice in the last century. We defended Europe throughout the Cold War, and actually have defended them since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. So we still have massive numbers of troops here and massive numbers of military armaments and supplies. There's nothing wrong with the United States cutting back on that and Europe taking a more assertive role in its own defense. I think that's something we want, and I believe it's something that the Europeans now realize and that the Europeans want.
I think that some of the fears from the European capitals is that it's happening at a time when the United States, particularly President Trump, is extremely disappointed. He's made that very clear to Mark Rutte and so on, and to the Europeans themselves, about their lack of support in the aftermath of the US and Israeli strikes on Iran in relation to the Strait of Hormuz. Is that situation subsided for Donald Trump?
I don't know that it's subsided. I mean, I know he's very disappointed. We have a situation where the president, at great political risk, I mean, nobody, his party was not, the MAGA movement is not supportive of foreign wars. The Democrats were going to oppose him no matter what he did. So without really any political advantage, he assessed the situation, saw the development of the missiles and the drones in Iran, and they're continuing to try and get access to a nuclear weapon. They're having that visible nuclear material where they could create 10 or 11 bombs, and said rather than kicking the can down the road or passing the buck, whichever metaphor you want to use, he decided that it was important that he act, despite the fact that it wouldn't be to his political advantage, because it was the right thing to do. We have bases in Europe that we have funded and supported for decades. We have countries that we've rescued in war, and we've been a very reliable ally to. When they won't even let us fly over their country or use our bases in their countries, you're going to find the United States, and particularly President Trump, will be very upset. And I don't know when that subsides, but hopefully it will over time, but I don't know if it has yet.
Do you think that this sort of reaction then at NATO is part of that, saying, look, you didn't come to our aid, so therefore we won't be there for you in times of need, and that's why we're removing capabilities?
No, I don't think anybody said that. What I've heard Secretary Rubio say is, look, we're supportive of NATO, but the reason that we have an alliance is so that we defend each other and work together. And if that's not how the alliance is going to work, then we need to reassess it. I don't think anybody said we're pulling out of NATO, we're going to pull out of NATO.
What about the Europeans' perspective when they say NATO is a defensive organisation, this was an offensive war outside the territory of NATO, so therefore the obligation wasn't for us, particularly when we weren't consulted?
I think that's a little too technical and a little too ignoring of reality. The Iranians have been at war with at least the United States and Israel for 47 years. I mean, they've been killing people. They've got these groups like Hamas and Hezbollah that go out and attack the U.S. forces and Israeli forces. They've now bombed Cyprus. They tried to bomb. They sent a missile down to the island off of India, Diego, I can't remember what the name of it is, but the island that the British control off the coast of India. Diego Garcia. So I think that may be a technical explanation that tries to get them off the hook for something they maybe should have done. Nobody was asking them to send troops. All we want to do was fly over the countries we defended and use the air bases or the military bases that we maintain in those countries. So if you're not willing to do that, what are you willing to do?
So it was a big mistake for a small ask, is that what you're saying?
I would say that was a very good summary.
Ambassador Andrew Pudzer, thank you very much for joining us on 12 Minutes at Euronews.
Thank you.